call this meeting to order. Thanks, Jeff.
So we're not gonna do it, you just wanna clean each other. Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody serve this up.
Yeah. Thank you. Meeting to order. Just making sure. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is the additional monthly September school board meeting, September 17th. We will open the agenda with the Pledge of Allegiance. Those who are interested can stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do you have the sheet?
No, it's items to remove from the consent agenda.
Yeah, first I'm going to go to that. Okay. So, next on the agenda, items to be removed from the consent agenda. Does anyone have any items they would like to remove from the consent agenda? Commissioner Fisher.
I'd like to remove 6A, the HR hiring recommendation.
Anyone else? Okay. Will someone give me a motion then to approve the items that remain on the consent agenda?
I don't think we need that. We just need to ask if there are any other changes to the agenda. That one automatically goes on.
Right, so B or C. So B and C stay. Great. So we're saying,
Does anyone have any changes?
well, first we're doing the consent agenda. Then we'll do, so first the consent agenda.
Yeah, we want to just remove
Move
it.
it, great, so,
And then
thank you. So a motion to approve the agenda. Does anyone have any changes they'd like to make to the agenda?
let me ask you, should we add this as a?
Yes, I'd like to add a resolution to the agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Carey. Would you like to add a resolution to the agenda?
Yes. It's the resolution that Kathy sent earlier today.
Okay, so we're gonna add that resolution to the agenda under the superintendent's report, item B. So BA.
Yes, I'm not sure if it's there. I did not see it there.
We'll just tell them it's gonna be a 5B.
Yep, it will be under 5B. Thank you, Commissioner
Under
Carey.
5B.
Yes.
Point of order. Does he need to make a motion to add a motion? As long as we're discussing the topic, which is already the agenda, does he need to add anything to the agenda?
I think so. Let's do it. It can't hurt.
Yeah.
It can only help.
Great.
Okay.
So will someone, so Commissioner Carey's given me a motion to add a motion to the agenda under item 5B. Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Ivanchik, any discussion? All right. All those in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstention? Then the motion carries. Next is public comment. The public will have 2 to 3 minutes to speak. The clerk is getting any public sign-in.
Would anyone like to speak at public comment?
Come on, Tyler.
All right, seeing none, we'll move. Board reflection. Any board member would like to reflect on anything? Seeing none, we'll move to.
Sorry.
Oh,
Quickly,
Commissioner Curry?
just quickly, this is Constitution Day, and I just wanted to note that our district does not teach students about the Constitution. So it's common in school districts, but it might be something to consider for the curriculum committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Curry, noted for the curriculum committee. Next is the chair's report. I'm going to ask that we start with BHS update with Tom Peterson. I forgot to add that. He is here, and then we'll go into the task force. So welcome, Tom Peterson, who is our owner's project manager with BHS BTC re-envisioning. Earlier tonight from 5 to 7 p.m. we had our committee meeting, our monthly committee meeting, and our committee members were present, And now we'd like to present to the board that meeting material and update. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you. So I want to really briefly go through some feedback here. I'm not sure how to solve that, but I'd like to just briefly go through the process here. I gave everybody a handout. People were asking, how is this all working? What's the next step? And I thought it would be helpful to create a visual aid here. So I think it's fairly safe to say that I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but we're at this process here where we have gotten all the way down into this part of the chart, and I'm sorry I can't get up on the screen right now, but where we went through schematic design after a long iterative process with the public and our staff and administration and students and the broader community. That was a process that helped us develop the owner's project requirements, which we call the OPR. The OPR then informed the conceptual design that went out to sell the bond, and we passed the vote, and then that information, the cycle kind of starts over again. We take the information that was gathered pre-bond and then get more input from students, staff, faculty, administration, and the broader community, and all that information gets funneled into the design process. So at the end of that design process, we have a schematic design, which is not the actual construction documents. It's really the fleshed out hopes and dreams. It's the fleshed out wish list. That went out in early July to be estimated by our construction manager. We received that detailed estimate back in early August. Oh, there it is. Okay. Since, actually it was mid-August, I think,
Yes.
when we received that back. So the good news is that it was a really, really detailed estimate, and we have a lot of confidence in those numbers. The bad news is that the numbers are frighteningly high. They're much, much higher than we have available funds. So we have a cap of $70 million to spend, of which roughly $8 to $10 million is soft costs. So that's design fees, management fees, permits, environmental studies, things like that. The rest is for construction. So we have, in round figures, about $60 million to spend on construction. The all-in estimate for the schematic design came in at just a hair over $91 million. So we've got a lot of work to do. So now we're in this process here where you can say, does the current design meet the bond budget and the OPR? Yes. But no, it doesn't meet the budget. It meets the OPR, but it doesn't meet the budget. So we're cycling back through the design process. It means that pretty much everything has to be on the table. We need to keep the OPR as kind of our touchstone. We have to hit as many of those marks as we can. Accessibility is a big one. Energy efficiency is a big one. Security is a big one. There are a lot of big ones. And we have to, now with the information that we've received through the estimating process with our construction managers on the team, we have a better understanding about some of the things that are driving the cost. So we have more tools now to help balance and balance our needs and our wants with what's available and what's actually doable. but it's safe to say that the schematic design as drawn is not going to be built as drawn. There are going to be some significant changes there. One of the things I wanted to highlight was that right now we're in a complex of about 240,000 square feet, give or take. That's the existing campus. I think the conceptual design for the bond vote was presenting somewhere around 280 to 285,000 square feet, which was, I think, about a 14 to 16% increase in total square footage for programming and other features. But at the end of that process of before the schematic design was complete, as we're gathering that information from our staff and faculty, the design turns out to be 295,000 square feet. To accommodate that, all those wish list items, the schematic design is at 295,000 square feet, which is 22% more than we have now, and 4 or 5% higher than what we promised or proposed for the bond. So we really need to scale back square footage. We may have to scale back some of the amenities that we wanted in that plan. We're hoping to get rid of at least 2 buildings and up to 3 buildings, and we may have to keep some of those buildings to keep the costs down. So last week we met with let me back up a little bit. Once we had the estimate back from Whiting Turner, we put Whiting Turner and BRD, Black River Design, into a room together for about 3.5 weeks, and they locked them in a room. They didn't come out. Their task was to overturn every rock and look at all the possibilities and really dig into the details of what's driving the cost and how to avoid those drivers, and come up with some options for ways to make this happen. So last week we met with them. They presented 8 options to us. The least expensive of which was still about $10 million over our budget, 10 to 15 over what we have to spend on construction. So we have made some progress, and I'm really impressed with the kind of work they're doing. It's really heartening to see that. It's to me, who I've been in this business for a long time, it's a joy to work with so many great professionals. We still have a lot of work to do. The bad news is that, yeah, it's hard, and we've got a gap to close. The good news is that we haven't spent a dime on construction yet. We're not in the middle of a project, so we're not over budget. It would be really bad if we were in the middle of construction and we ran into things that we didn't expect, or we were ignoring red flags, and we would have egg on our faces. But we're not in that position. We're in a pretty good position where we can slow down, consider all our options, and move forward. And the end product is going to be a much improved facility. And I'd be happy to take some questions, or if there's are there other highlights you want me to point out?
As one of the co-chairs with Commissioner Pillsbury of the Finance and Facilities Committee, we have so much more to unpack with you, and we didn't include this in a package for you to review because we want to be able to sit and go through this with you and give you the whole picture and the whole story. We have been incredibly successful from January up until this point, doing the work at hand as laymen's. It's new to us, but it certainly isn't to Tom and also to Black River and Whiting Turner Nagley Chase. This is a process. We wanted to show you the flow chart because this is the next steps. And are we surprised at the amount of $20 million? Yes. But when we look at and we have our committee members as part of the oversight committee with the city, our square footage estimates, were much lower than what the going rate is currently for construction in Burlington and throughout the state and throughout the country. When we look at our conceptual drawing, we are fortunate enough to secure that as a visual for voters, but it is conceptual. And there are plenty of districts that go out for bonding without any design. Similar to South Burlington that we've just seen in the news of 178 million. That being said, the process that we have taken is the correct action, the input. We're building a 21st century high school. We are meeting with all the departments, the staff, and we put forth a schematic design that would serve and meet the needs of this city and their students and the population. What we have allotted based on our budget does not. So we will now, like Tom spoke of, tomorrow, our weekly meeting, we spend typically 2.5, 3 hours a week, every Wednesday. We will go through what we did last September 11th, last Wednesday, what our next option is. And so we are positive, based on the research that we've done and the site research, which you'll get in a long, detailed memo, which will tell you what encompassed, 20 million, the overage, how we got to 90 million. And it will talk about soil, compromised, soil throughout the facility and areas that we will need to review. But again, the message is clear. We want it to be clear to you is that the work that has been done is the appropriate work and it's valued work. And we need to come from that place to be able to assess our needs and our wants. So feel confident in that and feel confident that we have worked extremely hard to get to tomorrow's meeting and see what that looks like. And then for us to bring back to the board less of just the flow chart, but the actual details so that it isn't just the Finance and Facilities Committee putting forth their recommendation. It's the input from all of us as you represent every ward in the city and the taxpayers that supported this. What else in my notes? Again, takeaways for you as far as talking points, like we said, our square footage, it was increased in size, but it wasn't done erroneously knowing that we were going to get to a higher part. Those are the true needs. When we talk about departments like special ed, they had no location here in this building. So we put us in the schematic design. We designed, for example, departments like that are spread out or in closets or don't have adequate space. And then what we talked about is based on the bond figure and where we're at is the existing square footage, the actual cost of the square footage. We had what we talked about in tonight's meeting, $236, just so you know this, for new construction, $150 for renovated construction. Our costs coming in now from the schematic design, August 2019, are $280 per square foot. So those numbers are real and we have no control over those numbers. Lastly, we have identified, like I said, which you'll be equipped with a package of all the areas of concern, but most importantly, we will get back to you with now a more timely and more weekly update as to where we are. You've given us the liberty to have these 7 months or 8 months to do the work that we've done. We've done good work in the sense of where we are today, and now we have to, give you weekly updates based on that. Does that make sense, everybody? Tom?
I think it's important to say at this stage that there's a good chance that this will not be a 2020 project. That in order to do this right and not squeeze it into some kind of artificial deadline to get started, we may have to take a deep breath as we do this redesign and rebudgeting and re-estimating, and we'll definitely have to reconsider the schedule. The redesign is going to affect how we phase the project. The beautiful thing about the the schematic design was that it allowed us to build a lot of new space into which we could move people and then renovate the old space. If we're building less new space, then that decreases that opportunity, and it creates some phasing crunches and pinch points. We also have now several months of redesign ahead of us. And then after the redesign, we have several more months of permitting. And permitting usually takes a minimum of 6 months. We're not that concerned about getting our local permits. We'll get them, but they're on their own time frame. The permitting process doesn't care what our schedule is.
But
It doesn't.
on a positive note, which we shared tonight, which was with our committee, is that, we have already been to the permitting office, they have seen our designs, it's not brand new to them. We're working with the city, but I hear you, and we did discuss tonight with our committee members that this would definitively, be something that would look towards 2021, that it would not be, we wouldn't be rushing, just to reiterate what Tom was saying, rushing to break ground next summer if we're not prepared to break ground next summer. Commissioner Wick?
Sorry, Tom, were you still
Yeah.
talking? Tom, what's the, roughly speaking, expected useful life of the new project, the new building? Is it 75 years, 100 years?
Depends on how well people want to take care of it,
Yeah,
you know?
I get it, but it should be
but-
roughly that long. It's a lot of money we're putting in. This one lasted, what?
55,
Yeah.
50.
In any event,
55 years.
what I think is, I personally think, just speaking for myself, a couple of things. One, I'm a little surprised that we got a dollar per square foot number that is so much higher than what the board was presented last fall when we voted on it. That's a little surprising to me, but it is what it is. We are where we are. I'd much rather get this job done right than quickly. So that's, I'm essentially agreeing with what you said. So it's much better for a project a building that's gonna last for generations. And I'm told this is the biggest school construction project in the state of Vermont, right? I mean, maybe it's not, but,
No, it is.
okay, it is.
Right now it is, until South Burlington passes.
We should not rush into this. Whoever's preparing the weekly reports to us going forward, I will greatly appreciate it. I'm sure the board will, because this board is going to have a big responsibility over the next several years to get this thing done right. I'm very interested in the needs versus the wants, and that those be clearly spelled out so we know as a board and as a community, so it's very transparent what trade-offs we're making. Because I really don't want to get to the end of this renovation and find that we've really, what am I trying to say? Compromised in a way that's just blown 70 mil that's not really what we should have done. So even if, as a result, the new information we've discovered, if our needs list, the special ed, all that stuff, turns out to be larger than the budget, in other words, if the new information, after as much chiseling as we can do, we're not going to get a product that the community needs, then we may want to reconsider the dollar amount. I don't want to go there yet, but I'm saying let's do it right rather than just get it done within budget.
Understood. Commissioner Sowers, and I just want to point out, we're going to have 3 more minutes on this subject so we can move to the meeting.
Correct,
Yeah.
but this is kind of in line with what you're saying. It's no surprise that it's over the budget. That usually happens. So, but just thinking outside the box for private donations, especially some of the big businesses in the area, if we could set aside like an auditorium or the library or the gym or something that, if we find that we can't chisel it down and we're compromising too much, there's a lot of us that would be happy to ask some of the big donors and, you can name auditoriums after them or whatever, but I hope we also, and I know you guys will, but I'm just throwing it out there, think outside the box for fundraising.
No, in fact, just to speak on that, we have as a committee, talked about that because we will design the next version of our iteration will have things that we'll chop off as we get close to the next estimate that we'll have, as we get closer, 6 months or however many months. So there might be 3 versions of things that to your point, we could have a campaign or funding for that would, add value back into it. But yes, Commissioner Curry and then Commissioner Gulick.
Yeah, just I wanted to point out talking points. We couldn't invest school money in this before the bond vote, so this is not, I don't think this will be a surprise for a lot of people who are familiar with construction and development. And also, this is the worst time to build in terms of competition for construction companies and labor shortages and tariffs and other conditions. So I'm actually glad to hear that buildings won't be demolished, because that means we'll have resources for the future. I understand that probably means some reconfiguration on the site, but I also think that some of the reaction I got was that the project was extravagant anyway, so I don't see it all as like a bad story. I think there's, we can go out to the public saying, there was no way we could have invested this kind of money ahead of the bond vote, and this is just part of a public process, and what happens.
Well said, thank you. Commissioner Gulick.
I just wanted to thank you, Claire and Keith, for all the work you've done. Thank Tom also. I am disappointed, obviously, but I'll get over it, and I will try to remain positive. I did want to say that I hear you saying that, everything's on the table. And as someone who went to the public and asked for this vote, I didn't get a lot of people thinking it was extravagant. I got a lot of people saying to me, you should be asking for more. This is actually not big enough. It's not, you guys aren't going, grand enough. So I actually got a lot of the opposite reaction. But I do hope that, we're asking our teachers now to compromise. We're asking our students to compromise. We've asked the taxpayers for money. I hope our builders and our architects are also maybe putting something on the table. That may be naive of me, but it would be nice, and certainly a measure of goodwill to also put something on the table.
Thank you. Commissioner Ivanchik and then Superintendent Obey.
Just briefly, I wanted to back up what Kendra said. We discussed getting in-kind donations. And then perhaps we should be making a concerted effort towards our legislature, since I don't know how many years ago they discontinued, they used to pay for a third of these projects in the past. So let's put pressure on our politicians.
Thank you. Superintendent Obey.
Yeah, just briefly, actually, there are some conversations at the superintendent state level around construction aid that are happening, because there's a number of districts who are now embarking on it, Winooski, South Burlington, and others. So this may give us the opportunity to actually access some of those funds if anything comes to fruition. But I would also say that this is part of the process, right? I'm not surprised on the reaction that this is what happens, right? When you start construction projects and you engage, you get, scope creep, and you get all kinds of things, then you have to kind of continue to work and get back down to where is manageable. One of the things I would say is that we shouldn't compromise on our priority goals that we talked about around safety, accessibility, all those pieces, that those should be the mainstay. Other than that, all the other things are kind of secondary in terms of added on. But I think it's an opportunity. It takes a while. This is going to take a few years to accomplish it. And while I've got the mic, I want to thank our staff who've been working tirelessly over the last several months, Director Lavery and Director Spalding, who've done insurmountable work on trying to get us here. And of course, Tom coming on board with us and give us some direction around that. And this is just the beginning. So thanks for the report. Thanks to the committee. And this is just the beginning of the process, really.
Yeah. Thank you. Commissioner Fisher, last one.
So I'd like to talk about communication and PR on this, because the word is getting out. VHS Register, I'm sure, is all over this.
Right here.
Right. So can I ask that the chair ensure that there is some statement from the board that board members can then share with the public around this?
Yes.
So that we're also consistent in our messaging.
Yes.
Thank you.
You have that.
I can say that when that figure first came in, the next day I was working on talking points, and I got some feedback from Nathan and Marty, and have refined some talking points, and I'll share those with everyone.
Thank you.
there are a couple points I wanted to make in closing, and then I can get out of here. And I just forgot one of them, but maybe as I tell one point is that we definitely cannot go back to the voters. 70 million is the cap, and that's related to the city's borrowing capacity. So that's not an option. I think you all know that, but it's part of my job to remind everyone of that. The second point I did want to make is that our job as staff and consultants is to gather as much information as we can, give you as many options as we can, and help you make informed decisions. But I really want to avoid having staff make the final decisions. I think it's really up to the school board to step up and take the responsibility to make some of the tough decisions that will be coming up. And it'll be our job to feed you the information so you can make those decisions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Next on the agenda is the update of the pre-K. It says task force. I want to recognize Commissioner Gulick and Commissioner Alwell, who's on the phone, for their work on the pre-K task force. Commissioner Pillsbury and I, as part of the Finance and Facilities Committee, have worked with Director Spalding over the last year with regards to updating the board and presenting what we have tonight again. This is in its beginning stages, even though it's a callback from information that we have been privy to with some refinement, but I wanted to touch upon it because it's due to the task force committee, and I would say that we are still in the planning stages based on school board feedback. So nothing has been decided. We're giving you information tonight to walk away with and then revisit next month. So, Director Spalding.
It's not really new information that we're providing you here. The intent of this, to go through this slide deck here, is it's been at least a year and a half since we visited this project. So to refresh everyone's memory on the work that was done, thought we'd kind of go through the details of all the options that were laid out on the table a year and a half ago before we kind of put a halt to this and created the pre-K task force. So the very first thing that the driver in looking at the pre-K renovations were driven from the study that we had done with Mike Smith and Wythen Burke, indicating that we had space constraints in our K through 5 elementary schools. So one recommendation was to pull some existing preschools out of those K through 5 elementary schools, creating some additional, addressing those space constraints. And one recommendation at the time was to look at putting those preschools at Ira Allen, and because it was an easy transition to just lease space for central office, they had suggested moving administration out of Ira Allen to create a central pre-K at Ira Allen. So if we go into the next slide. So as we worked with architects and engineers to design the renovation of Ira Allen to meet the pre-K needs, our goal was to create 9 classrooms in that facility. We currently have 8 pre-K classrooms spread across the district. There's currently 4 at Ira Allen now, 1 at IAA, 1 at SA, and 2 at Flynn. So because we also have a waiting list, as we were creating this preschool center, the goal was to at least achieve 1 additional classroom from what we have spread across the district. So in that plan, which is this plan here that shows 9 classrooms crammed in that building, what we weren't able to achieve is also provide a kitchen space to have our food service staff prep the meals for the feeding for the students. We also didn't have any sort of staff break room. So realistically, what we identified was to really accommodate all of the needs of the program, we probably could only do 8 classrooms and not 9. So the first thing that we identified is if we were to invest, a significant amount of money to create this preschool center at Ira Allen, we're not addressing, one, the current waiting list that we have and or any future growth for that program. So then we looked at other options. And again, this is just all a refresh of all the information that you've received so that we can make a decision to decide how to move forward. So some other challenges that we also identified at Ira Allen are the current access to that site off of Colchester Avenue. That we had some recommendations there to maybe utilize this as an exit only and enter in through UVM's property at the controlled light. Again, all those are driving costs and the improvements that would need to be made to that site. So again, if we can just.
And I think what we want to, speaking to Commissioner Gulick about this this week, Ira Allen would need to remain a single-story building. It is a compromised building. We cannot build on top of the building. So the footprint cannot be expanded to a certain degree, or it's limited in its scope. So as we look at the property, it is what it is. And what I spoke to Commissioner Gulick about and Commissioner Pillsbury is if you were to demolish that building and start anew and re-permit it, it would be a displacement issue. Where would we put those students currently within those 4 groups, as well as central office administration? So the thought of keeping the actual land and tearing everything down and building anew is a great idea. It would be cleaner and we could get a second floor, but we would have no capacity to relocate those students. So that is not an option. So looking at this option in 9 classrooms is limited because as we explained, it really is back to 8 because there wouldn't be a kitchen and support staff that we acknowledged through Stacy and staff is necessary. So you would equal out by staying there. And I just want to point out, which again, I could do it at the end, but Victor and Stacy's numbers, which we've shared with you in the past, enrollment has fluctuated between 547 students. Currently, we're at a total of 537 with 23 on the wait list this year. But
I'm sorry, could we just hear the whole presentation before justifications for why we're choosing or not choosing?
Oh yeah, we're not, sorry, I didn't mean it as justifications. I just wanted to explain the Ira Allen.
It's a little hard to absorb all the details without seeing the whole presentation.
Thank you, sorry about that.
So just the one other challenge that we haven't mentioned yet with the Ira Allen building just is based on the current building infrastructure. In order to reuse that building, we would have to tear it down to the bare exterior walls, and very few of those systems would be reusable. So kind of like what we're doing here at the high school, where we would reuse some systems such as our wood chip boiler system, that building has very little value to any of it that we would reuse to reduce those overall construction costs compared to building new. So, yeah, go ahead. So then we also looked at the options for leasing administrative space. So we reached out to a local realtor to look at options for office space that was available across the city. What we identified, the average cost per square foot was roughly $25 a square foot. In order to lease the amount of space that we needed to support our administrative staff, it would cost roughly $250,000 a year, with additional cost for parking if we were to provide parking for our staff. So that average cost was roughly $300,000 per year, which would be added to our general fund budget. So when we compare those costs to, let's say, building new, over 20 years, so if you were to build extra new building footprint to support the central office staff, and you had to borrow more debt in order to build that annual debt service would cost roughly $158,000 versus the $300,000 to rent. So the total 20-year cost to build versus rent would be roughly half the cost. So that brought us to looking at this north and south preschool option with building the south end preschool to support housing the administration on the second floor. So again, just to recap all of what you've seen over and over again, here is Pine Street, Champlain Elementary School. This is Shelburne Road here. This is the entrance to our property services building. This is the property services building. This is a small telecom building on our property here. This is the proposed building that we were proposing for the south end preschool with administration on the second floor. At one point in time, we had a access drive off of Pine Street that we were proposing to also use for a secondary or a primary drop off for students for Champlain Elementary School. There was resistance in proposing to add that drive. So in this option, we're proposing to access both the administrative offices and the preschool off of Shelburne Road at our drive to our property services building. This has roughly 5 classrooms on the main floor with support for the EEE program, and on the second floor, it would support the full administration of our central office staff. Go ahead. And then in addition to a south end preschool, we're also proposing a north end preschool, which would be addition off of Smith Elementary School. Ethan Allen Parkway is here. I believe this is Farrington Avenue here. One of the resistance for the proposed addition on Smith was the additional vehicle congestion on Ethan Allen Parkway, because basically the neighborhoods that support that are supported off of that road have no other entrance and egress, so the community didn't want to necessarily increase the amount of traffic to support that preschool. Some options were considered, but not flushed out, to possibly put a access off of Goss Court. This is the Miller Center here. We actually have road frontage on the property of the Miller Center that we could provide access to off of this is Goss Court here. So at the corner of Goss and Farrington. So where we left things at this point, this was kind of at the time we halted things and we didn't look at any other options for the north and south end programs. And then just to recap some of the value add to look at the north and south end options versus the Ira Allen option. We still have other projects through our capital plan that are going to require the need for swing space. That was another reason why we were proposing this option, to be able to build the north and south preschool programs and then reutilize Ira Allen as that swing space, even if we keep e-building for from the high school renovation to be used for swing space. That's not going to be available now for at least 5 years. We have more than one project that's going to require the need for this swing space. So if we have more than one space to be able to use to support those swing space needs, there's certainly value to that. And the other factor is being more convenient to those families that live in the north and south ends. And I'm not necessarily trying to sell this, I'm just trying to go over the details again of why we were supporting that. So here we looked at, go ahead,
The best.
We looked at the students that were transporting to all of the preschool programs in FY19. We don't transport all of the EEE students, but probably 80% of them. So this is just a breakdown of where we were transporting those students last school year. So by ward. So Ward 1, we had, 2 students going to Ira Allen, 1 going to SA, and 1 going to IAA. I won't read the entire list for you, but we have breakdown of Ward 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously, in Ward 5, we had 20 students that live in the south end that we're transporting up to Ira Allen, and there are the details there.
So we thought it would be helpful when you recognize, to recognize how many students are actually bused, to walk away with that number.
Clearly, we cannot predict, in 3 years from now when this project would be complete, where those students would be living, because probably most of them aren't even born yet. But this is as good of a reflection of what that might look like. And so this is just a updated timeline based on the timeline that we were working on at the time that we halted these projects, and we just moved everything out to where we are today. But we haven't looked at any of these design details with any of the architects, so in order to commit to any of these timelines would be extremely premature. So I think that's the next step, is receive some kind of direction on what we want to focus on for the future of our preschool program.
And I'd like to close by saying it's really important, because I know Commissioner Gulick and Commissioner Alwell and all those partners and volunteers that were part of the task force, it was not for naught. But you provided an opportunity for, over the last year, for people to weigh in, and with our partnership. But to Director Spalding's concern that he shared with Commissioner Pillsbury and myself, which makes sense, we have to do this work together instead of separately. So, you went out, we appreciate that opportunity and the work that was involved to hear, but now it has to go hand in hand with these facts. And you did at numerous times say, tell me what our options are, or tell me where we're going. And, it's up to all of us to work together to be able to then say, here is where we stand, and these are our options, and the board would then move forward. Does that make sense? Or board reflections on feedback? Commissioner Ivanchik?
I guess I would like to see a cost estimate. Well, first, I'd like to get a copy of these slides. We don't have these yet. What would be the cost estimate? So somebody mentioned tearing down the Ira Allen building and building a new building there. So you would have to house those children somewhere else, as well as central office. So rent that space temporary. Build a new building where Ira Allen is located, have however many stories you need to have built a preschool with added classrooms, and central office, say, located there. What would that kind of scenario come about? And then my other question is, you're distinguishing between Trinity and Ira Allen on the bus schedule?
Yeah, they're 2 different buildings.
But they're right next to each other?
Yeah.
And they're both run by BSD?
No.
No, they're not.
Okay.
No.
But we do transport a few that go to
Okay.
Trinity. We just-
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Do you want to answer to that? Yeah.
It's not necessarily an answer, but the last direction from the board was to basically halt all design work on any preschool option. So if the desire is to look at other, cost estimates on other options, or even refresh any of these cost estimates, I think we need some direction to be able to go back to our design team in order to do that.
Yeah. Commissioner Wick?
Marty, just for clarification, you said it was roughly $3 million. Is that just to build the south end pre-K, or is that $3 million for both the north end and the south end?
So the south end was roughly 5 at the time it was proposed 2 years ago, and the north end was, I think, 2.5. The reason why we didn't include the dollar figures here is because those are outdated, and I think that would require going back to the engineering team to revisit.
Got it.
And we don't want to necessarily.
What was the
post those.
$3 million?
$3 million we were talking about was central office.
That is correct.
Oh, that was
is
renovating central office.
Yep.
Sorry, my
Yep.
bad.
Commissioner Curry.
I guess I have a couple questions. One is that I wanted to understand what the committee's criteria was or is for a new building. Like, is the criteria that no one will, that to minimize busing out of your neighborhood? Is the criteria to drive the cost down? Like, what's the criteria? Is there criteria that's being used to, drive the conversation?
Well, first of all, I would use the past tense was, because the committee, as far as I know, is no longer. I mean, it was set to do a job and it did its job, so was is correct, not is. And the criteria was simply to look at what we have and talk to the partners and, survey parents in the old North End, the new North End, where we already have preschool spaces, to find out what would be most efficient in terms of money, time, and palatable to the voters, frankly. But a lot of it had to do with, finding a space that would work well as almost like a kind of lab school where we could collaborate with the hospital, where we could collaborate with UVM, and there was kind of a general consensus, especially between, people who've been doing this work for 30 years, that was a great location. So,
That was a great location.
IRA.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
Because,
So my other
because of its
question-
proximity to UVM.
So my other question is,
And the
there's a huge piece of vacant land at IRA. So did that come up in the conversation to build on it?
Where's the piece of vacant land, Ira?
The parking lot?
No, it didn't.
So we are maxed out with lot coverage there, so that wouldn't.
Right, but if you tore the
Yeah,
old
the
one
asphalt
down and built over the parking lot.
We did not look at any revisions of tearing that building down. The only work that we did with our architects was renovating that building based on the existing footprint, so far. Many options could be looked at.
Great. Commissioner Gold?
I think everyone, Liz, you had good questions. I think we all have good questions and concerns. I also think, obviously, this work can't be done by the board. This has to, again, I think, be some kind of a committee or task force that takes this on. Yeah, that's it.
Anyone else? Okay. Commissioner Pillsbury and I did spend time this year speaking with UVM about the potential of purchasing IRA, Allen, and we did have successful meetings, conversations with them. Since the new president, they have written us to say that they would not be in the position at this time to make any offer. But the work that we did as a committee over the past year was to get the property appraised. Currently, it hadn't, with Director Lavery, he actually did the work with the realtor. So we have an appraisal for that property, a value to it. We had these meetings with UVM. They were interested in the property. And then as of August, wrote us and said that they would not move forward with any offers based on the new president and executive team. And so that is an update that we wanted to share as well. Anything else? Commissioner Curry?
Did you have something?
I just was going to say, given that motion that was made last May regarding deposits, the Facilities Committee hasn't any wherewithal to do anything to prepare options for you that would cost analysis, because we said there would be no money spent on design. So if the board wants options and they want financial costs, then we have to be given the go-ahead to be able to do that work.
So Commissioner Curry, you bring up a great question that I have not heard about
the square footage of IRA or the parking lot, so that's something we will take away and talk to Director Spalding about.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we just heard from Tom, we have new construction cost estimates of 280 roughly.
A square foot.
Yeah, and which, I mean, you can get those estimates any day, anywhere, from any construction company that's doing commercial development at any time in Chittenden County. So I'm very conservative about this, but it's a red flag for me to hear that board members were talking to UVM about a real estate transaction. Number one, I prefer to respect the executive session exemption for real estate discussions. And number two, I feel like it really gets ahead of the board for a committee to go and just even have exploratory conversations, because this is a small community, and rumors go fast and deep in our community. And so it's as a red flag for me to hear that there were conversations, and I don't mean to not appreciate all the work everyone's done and all the goodwill. It's just uncomfortable to me that there were even, overtures about that, because the board hasn't had that conversation. At least maybe I missed it, but I wasn't aware of it.
No, thank you. And Superintendent O'Day?
Just for clarification, before you close out this topic, there isn't any sort of motion to re-engage Marty back into cost estimates or anything like that, right? Because I know a number of questions have asked, and we were asked to halt, and so Marty has done that, but people are asking about, so you're not asking, there isn't anything on the table to say that go back and do estimates on rebuilds or anything like that?
Not at this time, no. And it was just to acknowledge Commissioner Gulick and Commissioner
Alwell's, circling back from the task force. Great. Anything else? All right. Next on the agenda is the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair. We have two items here. First item, the global climate strike. The board had asked for an update on this particular item. We had a public delegation last week that was sort of advocating inclusion of our students and wanted to hear what, how we were supporting. And we are very much supportive of the social actions and the curricular actions around climate change and supporting global climate. We did put a statement out, sent it to all schools, and communicating with parents through principals. I don't know if you can read it on the slide there. It's kind of small, but it's on board docs, so you might be able to see. And basically, it just acknowledges that we support the students in their endeavor to support this global action, and that the absences on the Friday will be excused absences, but we do require students to have their parents acknowledge that they are taking that particular day to do this action. And at the same time, we know that all students won't be able to leave school to go join some of the external activities, and many of our schools have engaged in a number of different actions within the school to talk about global climate change and proactive actions that students and staff can do to support that. So that's basically the information as updated, and looking forward to a positive day on Friday. I think we've got many students who are excited. Many of our staff have organized field trips and are doing some curricular things within the classrooms, and hope for a good day.
Thank you. Next is...
Can I ask what time, is there a time that this is happening? Is it all day, or?
I couldn't give you a specific. There are two locations that different events are happening, so I'm not sure, but I'll check to see the find that information and send it out to the board.
There's a poster on that bulletin board with the schedule.
It's from 12 to 2 at City Hall.
Oh, I need the script. Okay. The next item was around, I believe last week we had a conversation around instructional coaches at the magnet schools, and the deliberation ended up in the board not taking any action to increase the allocation of instructional coaches to those schools. The board executive had asked me to look into it to figure out a possible way for the board to deliberate on possible action to add that inclusion. So we do have a motion that we're going to recommend to the board to deliberate on, and I'm sure the board will take that opportunity to look at and nuance it to their preferred desire. And I will pass it around and present it, and then share a few thoughts of consideration before you start deliberation on the motion. Okay. So as staff, we had.
Superintendent O'Bang, is there a way that the public can see the motion that you're looking at?
Yeah, we'll post it up. So I'm going to read it out loud right now, but I think it might be altered before you get the final, and so the board. So, all right. So what staff is suggesting to start the conversation for the board is a motion that would go in this sort of direction. I move to direct the superintendent to add 1.5 FTE instructional coach position to be allocated to the Integrated Arts Academy, and 0.5 FTE instructional coach position to be allocated to the Sustainability Academy for fiscal year 2020. If required, the superintendent is permitted to exceed the fiscal year 2020 budget for this purpose, despite the prohibitions of Executive Limitation 2.3 financial conditions and activities as a result of this action. That is a start, and I'm sure the board deliberate and decide on nuances to that. I would like to make a few comments of other considerations the board should be thinking about. One, the magnet school hiring process would not apply. The board had put forward a policy around the magnet school hire. These are district staff. These are staff that report directly to our curriculum director, and they will be preferably to the board, so we can expedite the process, because I know the board expressed a need to start it right away. If we were to go follow the policy, which we can, then that means we'd have to do the committee and do all those steps and be able to do that. So that's something for the board to think about if they want us to reconsider that. These are one-year positions. They're not guaranteed to be part of the budget unless the board installs them in our budget process to continue. The staff hired will be LTC, reflecting the fact that the position is not guaranteed for the next year, and because of the last hire. Okay, so those are a couple of areas that I think the board should consider before they make a decision on how to bring forward a motion that we can certainly deliver on. Okay.
Thank you, Superintendent O'Bang. Yep.
Okay.
So Commissioner Wick, I'll have you read the motion.
Sure. So just to put the motion on the table, I'll make the motion just as it's written, just as the superintendent read, except just for clarity, my motion would change the word fiscal year 2020 to school year 2019-2020 for clarity, because even some of us wondered, are we in fiscal year 20 now? It's only 2019. So just to clarify, wherever it says fiscal year 2020, my motion says school year 2019-2020. That's the current school year. That's the current year we're in. I don't have any other changes to that, so I'm going to make that motion. And I guess it needs a second if it's going to move forward at all.
Yes.
I'll second.
Commissioner Avanti?
All right, you can lead it, so any discussion.
Yep. Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Avanti. Commissioner Fisher, then Curry?
So I do not support giving the permit to exceed the budget. I believe that the board can request, believe it's more prudent for the board to operate within our budget, and we can do that by directing the superintendent to give us some options on how to fund these. We know that the district has operated at a surplus the last few years, thanks to the good work of the superintendent and Nate and the district staff. So I think a better option, fiscally prudent option, is to request some options on how to fund it, or just direct him to find the options, rather than give him permit to go over budget.
Commissioner Curry?
I have a question, and then if it pleases the chair, I'd like the floor back to make comments. So my question is, then if there are internal candidates who are at halftime and they apply for these positions and are hired, then would you need to fill their positions like dominoes?
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Jeff?
If an internal candidate is selected for that position, yes, that creates a vacancy.
So I also cannot support the motion because I feel like there's not enough financial data at this point in the year to exceed the budget, and I don't support exceeding the budget. I was hoping that there was a trade-off that would, be within the budget. And I think creating that domino effect is problematic if there are internal candidates and then we have to fill others, and that's a lot more HR resources. I do want to make a comment on this notion, though, that there's been a surplus every year. I think from what I've understood from Director Lavery, please speak to this if you can, is that it's not like we're ending up with $1 million every year. This is a budgeted surplus that was budgeted so that we could fill a hole that gets carried forward as a kind of stacked effect, if you can explain this. Am I right in trying to guess at how to explain that? It was to mitigate a higher tax increase and a deficit and all these other cumulative effects. So let me just finish. That in my experience, this is not like a surplus, because I know Director Lavery's doing a great job, but in my experience, this has been budgeted to end up there. And just on principle and practice, I don't support exceeding the budget.
So I would explain it a little differently than that. I would say every year we've been incorporating a prior year's surplus into our next year's budget as a form of revenue. So we've been planning our budget is our spending plan, right? So we've been making our spending plan, and we've included in that spending plan the expectation of spending some, what I'll call, leftover money. So but what we've seen generally is on an annual basis, and I should add that part of what we've done is built a contingency in, so there's almost a plan extra in there that unless something happens, we would expect to have some money left over.
It's to keep the tax request to the voters down.
Right, I mean, that is one of the goals, is you're saying we're going to use this revenue so that we don't have to instead ask the voters to come up with it. But we're still producing a surplus annually for a variety of reasons. I mean, and we've talked about them at different times, and sometimes different things, some more intentional, some definitely not intentional, right? We had a teacher strike one year that meant that we didn't spend a portion of our money, for example. And other times we earn more money on things. And so all those things go into it. But I think to Commissioner Fisher's point, and kind of what you also alluded to with respect to exceeding the budget, the intent of what we tried to craft here was not to say we're going to exceed the budget, because I think that given just the general churn that we have and in the district generally, we probably will be able to afford adding these positions without having to make any other reduction somewhere else in a school or a department. And that's really the goal, what we were trying to accomplish, was say, let's not go somewhere else and say, at this point in the year, you have to reduce for any given particular reason. We know that we have a contingency fund that's there if we don't achieve some of those savings. The risk, of course, is if something else more dramatic happens and that requires us to spend money, well, we will have made a choice such as this one that we weren't forced to do, where we kind of said, okay, we're going to spend more than we'd planned in this area, and now we're faced with something where we don't have an option. So really, the intent of this was to suggest that, or really to have the board acknowledge the fact that adding these positions it was not part of the budgeted plan, and therefore, if the result of that is that we're over, there's an acknowledgement that everybody did this with their eyes wide open. It doesn't mean that we think this action alone is going to put us in that position. I can tell you I'm still going to do the best I can to make sure that we meet all the students' needs we can, but that we don't end up in a deficit even despite this. So it's not as though we're just saying, well, financial control is out the window because we're adding this. You know, it's free to spend whatever we want.
Can I just put an exclamation mark on that piece? One of the phrases we put in the motion is "if required," and
Yes.
So we're going to do our best not to exceed the budget, but we can't guarantee that at this point, right? As Director Lavery has said, in the past years, we've had the practice that we've managed well enough, and we know we have current vacancies that are being filled, so there are some short savings that we predict that we may probably be able to do, but we can't guarantee it. But so this gives us the leeway to say, okay, the board really wants to do this, and we think we can support it, but we can't guarantee that we may not go over depending on what happens throughout the rest of the year. If this was, in May or June, we probably would have a better indicator in terms of where we are in terms of doing that, but this is early in the year as well.
Commissioner Wick.
My recollection is, at least when we were budgeting for instructional coaches, those were presently heavily subsidized. Would that also be the case for these two?
No, not at this time. There's a process for applying for the grants, and these are not part of any approved award.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I would say something.
Commissioner Carey. Yep.
I do support this proposal because the bottom line is what we're trying to do is provide assistance, provide needed personnel for the students at SA and IAA that are currently available in the other schools in the district. I'm happy to see that Jeff has introduced a clarification regarding the phrase fiscal year 2020, making that change. And I'm also happy to hear, I haven't heard everything exactly, because of the phone connection, but I'm happy to hear the discussion around the phrase if required, because the implication to me, and I think the spirit of this resolution is that the cost of these additions may not be force us to exceed the fiscal year 2020 budget. That if required is a very big phrase there that kind of clarifies the intent of this proposal.
Thank you, Commissioner Carey.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Evancho.
I wanted to add that I will support this motion. And I also wanted to mention that like across the nation, instructional coaching has become the method of best practice as to be an effective way to improve educational systems. And I believe that our Burlington School District administration wants instructional coaching at every school in the district. That's something that our Director of Curriculum is aiming for. So currently, only the teachers at the magnet schools do not have this instructional coaching in our district. And I believe that all teachers in our school district should have access to instructional coaching as part of their professional development.
Thank you, Commissioner Evancho. Commissioner Bullock.
I'll be quick. I'm very loath to go over budget for sure, but I am going to vote yes on this, mainly because I still, and I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but I still don't have a full picture of our budget, our complete budget. And I feel as if I did, I might be able to make a more informed vote. But for now, I'm gonna vote with my conscience, and hopefully at some point I'll have a better understanding of where all of the money goes.
Thank you, Commissioner Bullock. Anyone? Okay, I would like to thank Commissioner Allwall and the board last week. I know it was less than ideal to, go over that motion last week. There was some confusion, but it got to the place. Commissioner Allwall, I know you're on the phone, and Commissioner Carey, and the rest of the school board, where we worked collaboratively with the superintendent. Thank you, superintendent, for taking the time, the week's time to present the motion to us, and for the clarification, as well as Director Lavely, that it is for this school year. I think when we got to this place, because this school board went forward and asked that the district work with a full magnet school coach. And so we discussed that, and you went forward. Under this leadership of the board, we asked the magnet schools to go back to the model of a full-time magnet school coach at both SA and IA. We are thrilled with the HR hiring of those 2 magnet school coaches, but this board's intention was never to have that be at the expense of the instructional coaches. So there was a definitive misunderstanding. And I would ask that, the superintendent and Director Phillips, Curriculum Director Phillips, in that instance, before they cut instructional coaches at our 2 magnet schools, to have sort of contacted myself or reached out to the board to say that that was what was going to happen. And so when that became a surprise to us, and in looking at that meeting's note, Commissioner Alwal spoke to that and saying, I said this wouldn't be at the expense of instructional coaches. So we've learned a lesson here, which is, when we're going to cut instructional coaches, especially from 2 of our most vulnerable schools, the board, it shouldn't come as a surprise. And so the need for this motion tonight, and the work that we've had to take to do that, I think is because of our lack of communication to address this. So I want to acknowledge that and move forward collaboratively, because Stephanie Phillips, Commissioner Phillips, Director of Curriculum, you worked incredibly hard to educate us last year on the importance of these coaching models, and we received incredible feedback based on your hard work and your personnel of how it was benefiting our faculty. And the professional development it was providing them, and they felt inspired, and again, the work was expressed to us at public comment and on various aids. And so these 2 schools being not starting the school year with that model was incredibly surprising and disappointing to us and their communities. So thank you. We didn't add to this motion that we want to move quickly and efficiently, and I recognize Commissioner Curry and Commissioner Fisher's concerns, as well as the rest of the boards, but, at the expense of potentially getting internal candidates, we hope that Director Phillips, you pick the best, individuals for these jobs with HR, and that we, the less impact, the better on both these schools. But thank you, and thank you, board, for your patience and moving forward, and especially Superintendent Obeng, thank you for recognizing that and moving forward.
All right, let's vote. All right.
So we'll vote on the motion. So Commissioner Wick, can you read it one last time with its amended dates?
Oh, sure. The motion reads, I move to direct the superintendent to add 1 0.5 FTE instructional coach position to be allocated to the Integrated Arts Academy, and 1 0.5 FTE instructional coach position to be allocated to the Sustainability Academy for school year 2019-2020. If required, the superintendent is permitted to exceed the school year 2019-2020 budget for this purpose, despite the prohibitions of Executive Limitation 2.3, financial conditions and activities, as a result of this action.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. And Commissioner Ivanchik seconded the motion. Commissioner Fisher?
I'm sorry, just point of order. It's just odd that it starts with I move. Isn't it the board moves?
The board moves, yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. An individual makes a motion.
Individual makes a motion, so.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. Thank you, Commissioner Ivanchik. So all those in favor of this motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
Any abstentions? Okay, so we have 2 opposed. Then Commissioner Fisher and Commissioner Curry. The majority wins, so the motion is passed. Thank you, everyone. Moving on the agenda is the approval of the consent agenda, hiring recommendations. Commissioner Fisher. Pulled that up.
So I'm sorry, are we approving the consent agenda?
No,
or
we already
discussing-
approved it. We're discussing item A, sorry.
We already approved B and C, we're discussing 6A.
Thank you.
Chair Wall. So my question, I think a lot of board members have a question about this, so I guess I'll just open the floor to Director Anderson Brown to explain.
Welcome.
Pardon?
Need to know what the question is?
So okay, I'm sorry. The question is, why is this particular recommendation to hire the absolute best decision for the district? If you want some more specific questions, I can do that.
Point of order, I'm sorry, should we do this in executive session? Is this not sensitive personnel information? I'm just putting that out there.
It's a hiring recommendation. Is that a personnel matter for executive session?
Traditionally, it would be. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's, sorry, I think
Commissioner
there's
Curry.
a distinction between discussing the candidate versus discussing the process or other things. So it may be that people need to kind of save some questions for executive session and decide for themselves.
Okay.
I don't know.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Commissioner Curry. So let me ask some direct questions. Has there been any communication to staff that this hire is finalized?
So this hire is not currently finalized. We were just working on the details of the contract, which was finished today. So they have not signed their contract.
So I appreciate that. Has there been any communication to staff that this candidate is going to be the interim director?
I have not made communication to staff. I have heard rumor, which is a rumor, that there was an internal employee who did do a communication. I have not seen it. I'm not privy to that information.
Okay.
You
Thank
need to
you.
get closer to the mic. Jeff, is it on?
Okay, now it's.
And trying to separate my thoughts. Can you explain the process to I appreciate the write-up of what happened looking for the candidates. Can you explain the process to identify ideal interim candidates after the second round was unsuccessful? The write-up said, I can bring it up. The write-up said the write-up said Superintendent Obeng, both Bonnie A. Johnson and Superintendent Obeng canvassed staff and community resources to find a suitable interim director, but both were unsuccessful until Marnie Lakin agreed to be in the position. Did you search?
I think you probably wanted a private session for this, but I would say that we did canvass staff looking for individuals who would be interested in the interim position.
And she was one of those.
Anything more than that, I would only comment in executive session.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I can ask publicly.
Okay. Anyone, Commissioner Sowers?
Yeah, I just want to say overall, this whole thing is, for me, extremely disappointing. The way the whole communication has happened with this, I feel like this is the first time I've been appraised of what's been going on all summer. The interview process, the lack of finding candidates, what's been going on. We shouldn't have to ask for this information. This should have been given and updated, in my opinion, during board meetings. So that's one of the things I would like to say. And the other thing is, this should have been, I think, kept open, this job position, until filled, which it is now. Extremely important position. So I do hope in the future that we will be kept appraised of this, because it's, I'm frustrated.
I understand your frustration. I think it was quite challenging because we did have a number of moving pieces through HR department over the summer. But I know I had updated the chair a number of steps along the way because she had questions from board members. And I also did a communication over the summer through the board in terms of what was the status of the process. If you look at your weekly updates, you'll see there's mention of that. And I think I mentioned even at a board meeting, that we were still in the process, and someone asked last week about, and we said we were still in the process, that we hadn't completed. So we wouldn't communicate until we've gotten through. There wasn't a candidate to bring forward in June, July, or August, so there was no definitive sort of presentation at that point.
Even that process, though, of where we are in the process is extremely helpful for, I can't answer questions to anybody else, but for me, knowing sometimes if we don't have candidates, how many we had, this is where we are, that's the collaborative process that I think we're all looking for when we're doing hiring, and it's a super important position. And so I just would ask that we don't know sometimes enough to ask these questions, and I just hope that it is forthcoming. And again, I will express my extreme frustration with that.
Commissioner Waltz?
I want to build on what Commissioner Sowers is saying. The collaborative process, essentially what we are hoping is going to happen is that people feel good about the changes that are made or the people that are hired. And I want to urge you, Superintendent, please, if you foresee anything that is concerning or controversial or something that might send a group of staff people into a tizzy, please give us the heads up.
I will certainly do that. Most of the time, I don't hear it until I hear it from a board member. But as when we know, we'll communicate it with you as well.
And I just want to go back to a couple steps. The superintendent did, in executive session and at board meetings over the summer, tell us, snippets that this hiring process, they had some candidates, the hiring committee wasn't going forward with some of those candidates. So we heard snippets of that. What I think is important for us to recognize is, and I've asked you, Superintendent Bang, when did you find out that our former BTC director was resigning? Roughly, I mean.
In the summer.
So we found out extremely late in the summer, our typical for an administrative leadership position, I think we're talking about this. We wouldn't be talking about every hire. We would love to know every hire in the district, but this is a school leader at our technical center for ascending schools as well. So we did not know our former BTC director was resigning all through the spring, the hiring time where we could be recruiting. So we found out late in the school year, at the end of the school year, and then given the situation with our HR department, a lack thereof, a director, and with Z starting July 1st, I think it would be fair to say in my conversations with Superintendent Obang that there was little to no recruitment for an incredibly important leadership position. So we are right now in an interim position. Everything we're asking of the superintendent and Director Brown is that we be included in this process moving forward. This interim individual, from what superintendent has shared, he did reach out to leaders within the BTC community to take on this role. And there was nobody offering up, so Superintendent Obang.
I don't want to belabor this. I hear what the board's saying around the communication piece, but if you remember back, I actually came forward and I wanted to do an interim and not do a posting, but the board felt that we wanted to post because I didn't think it was the right timing because it was so late to get candidates at that point. So I just wanted to kind of share that we did make efforts to try to communicate. It didn't happen as smoothly as you would like it, and we hear that, but we did make efforts to try to keep you in the loop around what was happening.
And we'll find out more in executive session what this contract entails with this interim, the length of it, so that if, the posting is up, the board did put the pressure, I think, with the cooperation of the superintendent and the director of HR to put the posting back up so that we are actively pursuing someone for this position. And our concern right now is, moving to executive session to find out more of the details of where we are now currently in supporting the staff. Commissioner Fisher and then Curry.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I just want to clarify what you just mentioned about the length of the contract. The document provided by Superintendent
no offense,
Obeng says,
personnel.
this is a public record. Marnie will serve as interim director until June 30th, 2020 as needed. So can you explain that as needed phrase?
Yeah, well, we don't know. We're posting, looking for a permanent individual. Most practicing directors are currently in contract, right? So we assume that someone wouldn't be able to join us until towards the end of the year, unless we're fortunate enough to find somebody that happens to be available sooner than that, right?
So the contract put forward would be if you find someone available, then Marnie would return to her prior role?
That would be my intention.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Curry.
Yeah, so the reason I'm troubled about this process is because the board passed a policy just recently about receiving a whole set of documents 5 days before seeking a permanent or interim. And we don't have any of these documents. And I find that problematic. I find this request premature because it deviates from policy. And secondly, we have a situation where the request is for a provisional license. And so my question, which I think I know the answer to, is does this mean that we will be required to pay for mentoring? What's the cost associated with that? What's the mentoring plan? I'd like to have that information. And also with the communications, it is really troubling to me that I learned a lot of details from people both inside and outside of the district about this process, and I had nothing to say to them. I was blindsided, and that is a really uncomfortable position to be in with such a premier tech center that has had a lot of turnover the last 3 years. And I don't feel like we can afford to be in a situation with a provisional license for very long. And I think the search process needs to be real and rigorous.
Thank you, Commissioner Curry. Anything?
I just had questions. What's a provisional license require and what's the cost? What's the mentoring plan?
When a person applies for a provisional license, they pay for the application fee, so there's no cost to the school district. Superintendent Obeng, with his license, will be overseeing the provisional. And Bonnie will be also supporting the position, that's the best of my knowledge, as she ramps up and works towards gaining her provisional license with the AOE.
And what about the requirement for mentoring?
Yeah, she said Bonnie Johnson Aiden. So she's
on
our
the approved list.
She's our mentor. So all our that's part of the reason why we have a district principal, because we don't have to go externally and pay for someone, because she plays the role as the mentor.
So is she on the list of approved mentors with AOE?
I haven't seen the list, but she has played that role in the last couple of years as in the role. So I would assume that she is on a list, but I haven't seen the list.
I would like to request confirmation that the AOE will approve Bonnie as a tech center mentor, please.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move on. So we will.
I'm sorry, point of order. So there were a number of questions about this recommend to hire that we cannot ask in public session.
Right, so I said we were gonna, you cut me off.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we will move on this item to executive session. We will come out of executive session with an update on this hiring recommendation.
Can we do A? Can we do B and C?
Those are approved.
We never approved it.
Yeah, we approved the consent agenda.
Keith doesn't remember.
All right, okay.
I just wanted to move that we approve the consent agenda, items B and C.
Yes, do we have a second? Second. Commissioner Fisher, all those in favor of approving items B and C on the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Thank you, Commissioner Pillsbury. Moving on to item 7, the board annual work plan. Commissioner Wick?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not going to belabor this. It's been posted. I trust everyone's read it. Essentially, Commissioner Fisher and I and Claire, so the board officers, worked on this. We sort of took a fresh look at the existing work plan, at the policies, and this is what we came up with. Essentially, as you'll see, there are 3 columns: superintendent monitoring reports, board self-governance, and other seasonal items to be aware of, that the board should be aware of and working on. And then we got the rows being the months. So what we tried to do is ask ourselves about seasonality. When is the right time to take up a particular subject? And we tried to put it there in the right place. And ultimately, we spread things out a little bit so they weren't too bunched up. And in the final analysis, we were pretty happy, but I'm sure we've missed some things. So if you can think of anything, let me know. We'll have a couple minutes to discuss questions, comments, etc. And then ideally, maybe this will be ready for adoption, maybe it won't.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. Commissioner Fisher?
Just one thing to add, the column for board self-governance, this is not something that we have been doing. So this is something that we need to start doing. This is part of the policy governance framework, or we need to resume doing it.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Superintendent.
Yeah, I would hope that the board would allow staff to have an opportunity to review, because I see a number of inconsistencies and actually duplications in the document. So we would want an opportunity to kind of look at that and maybe give our best thinking in terms of the staging of some of the reports as well.
Yeah, we might as well put that on the table. Give me an example of a...
Well, I see in June there's a reducing disparities, and then in January there's one as well too.
Yeah, that was intentional because that is so important to our global mission. We decided to put that on twice a year. Of course, we can debate.
Same report, okay.
You were right. We can say, okay, let's just do it once, but...
Commissioner Fisher.
So
I'd also say that, thanks for pointing out the point that the board has not looked at the board self-governance piece, because that is a companion piece that really goes with the whole package. It's like not having the left hand or the right hand. I would encourage the board to actually have a real conversation around what they want to move forward with in the governance structure. Because I'm not sure if the board really wants to follow a policy governance model, and you might have a better framework that would work for this board, and probably that might be a starting point for the board to have that conversation, because I think we're kind of piecemealing a lot of things, and I don't know if it's working for the board, but it's not working for staff, that's for sure. But I would just suggest that the board have a conversation around where they want to go with this.
Thank you. Commissioner Vancha?
Thanks for putting this flow chart together, and yeah, I'd be interested in participating in the board self-governance part and further discussing policy governance. But I see that for under other, we have earmarked July, August, and September for whole budget education. And this is something several commissioners have requested and requested over a year ago. And we are more than halfway through September, and we have, I would really push to get that before we start budget planning, which happens starting in October.
You said whole budget education?
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, we were very excited to put that in there, as you'll see, for 3 months in a row. In other words, this board feels, let's just say, we don't really understand the whole budget as well as we'd like to. Yeah,
yes.
With you, 100%.
So let's schedule it.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Curry?
I guess one question I have is, did you all look at whether, does our budget still have money for board development? Because that was always a thing.
It does.
Yes.
There is a line item in there.
Yeah,
Couldn't tell you how much it is right now, but.
Yeah, so that was kind of the intention, was to use that line item to support board, training. And the other thing is the original calendar had the racial bias awareness training in it that we're supposed to have twice a year.
Thank you.
So if you could capture that, please. And that just, I just wanted to mention that because that's something we were trying to schedule and need to get back to.
Which I'll follow up with you, Commissioner Curry, on that date. I know we had originally thought about August and then September, so let's revisit that. Thank you for that reminder.
So regarding this, it's clear to me that this is a decent introduction. People have comments, people are engaging. I don't think we're going to pass this thing tonight. I think it's premature. So now that it's public, I welcome staff and commissioners to send Mike and myself comments if you didn't think of them already, and send them on. But I think what we'll do is at an upcoming Policy and Governance Committee meeting, we'll notify everybody, but that we'll take this up and we'll dig in and we'll get it right, we'll get it better, we'll improve it.
And Commissioner Wick and Fisher, may I recommend that we do the next Policy Governance meeting maybe at central office so that Superintendent Obang and Director Lavery or whomever can participate, and then you could potentially do the final draft and then bring it back?
We have recently done one at the central office, so I have no problem doing it again there.
Any other reflections, comments? All right, we'll move to the board policy updates. Commissioner Wick.
I'll defer to Commissioner Fisher on these.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so we'll start with a 2.8 communication and support to the board. Please hold. 2.8. So the additions, my format is deletions marked with a strike through, additions marked with an italics. So I believe the only thing proposal added to this is number 10. So this is under the superintendent shall not. 10, allow the board to be unaware of any significant legal, regulatory, or financial matter, finding, decision, or agreement. The thing that really spurred this was finding out that we were negotiating with the DOJ and that there was a proposed settlement, and the board was asked to make a decision in short order. I believe that the board should have time to consider and appropriate time to deliberate. So that's the intent of this addition.
Okay. Commissioner Vanchi? Oh, no. All right. Next, first reading. You've done that one. So item B.
All right. So next one is 3.3, delegation to the superintendent. So the intent of these additions or modifications was to take out some of the, I don't know how to describe it, the never statements. For example, under 2, instead of the board will never prescribe organizational means delegated to the superintendent, the board has obviously been interested in how the superintendent operates the district, and we have gotten involved. So as much as I don't like it, I personally have voted in favor of it occasionally. So that's why I changed the phrase to the board should avoid prescribing organizational means. And then finally at the bottom of 4, I felt that sentence gave the superintendent excessive latitude to operate. I think that any superintendent, any executive should be bound by the norms of similar executives in similar organizations. And so I don't like the blanket approval that sentence gives the superintendent, any superintendent, to operate.
Next.
Okay. Next is 4.3. So this is an accumulation of a number of things over the last year. I'm not going to read through this, but I took out some of the excessive language and I tried to memorialize how we're operating today, which is that the chair is the one who sets the wheels in motion, working with the vice chair, the clerk, superintendent, and other board members. The other thing that's important, I think, is 2C. Meeting materials and documents should be posted 5 calendar days in advance of the regular meeting. We, and me included, are not good at this. But every other high-functioning board has what's called a board packet. And that's the old way to do it. It used to be delivered by hand. But we should be able to do that electronically so that board members can take the time to review the materials. No offense to what happened today, but the board should never see materials on the screen for the first time at the meeting. The point is that we get the materials in advance, we consider it, and then we're ready to ask questions about it and to deliberate about it. And so that also is letter E. All right, now I'll stop talking.
Letter E?
Letter E is around
Yes, got it.
prioritizing board deliberations and decision-making.
So these are all first readings. Great. Thank you for your work on that, Commissioner Fisher.
And I will, sorry, one more note. Commissioner Curry pointed out something in the city charter, so I'm going to make a small tweak to the board meeting for, she suggested some language, but I'll probably take that as recommended.
Okay. Commissioner, Superintendent O'Bang, then Commissioner Curry.
Commissioner, I wish I was a commissioner.
I was acknowledging Commissioner.
I would ask the Policy Governance Committee, I think it is, to consider, I like the, we need to sort of structure the pre-planning, planning, and post-planning of board meetings, but we also have to acknowledge that we are now doing meetings back-to-back, right? So you have to think about the timing and what you expect before, and I know that we've kind of gotten into putting new items on the second meeting, so some of the things that we're expecting for the first meeting may not apply if there's only 5 days or whatever, so that's something to consider, to think about how we want to position that.
Thank you, good point. Commissioner Curry.
I just want to share on 2E of 4.3, the board meetings should prioritize board deliberation and decision-making. However, the presentations of materials language I find overly broad because we have much less administrative staff than we've had ever. And if you look at our ratio of staff to admin, it is the worst in the state. And I'm just sympathetic to administrative staff who, often don't have the time to prepare materials that far in advance all the time. So I don't know what materials, I agree that we should receive all the materials on Friday when the board packet goes out. Having said that, I think there's always updates. My experience under 3 superintendents was that there's always going to be something that needs updated. Secondly, we've had a practice over the past, since Superintendent O'Bang has been here, of seeing presentations by admin staff that are forward-looking, so we're more of a deep dive into, here's our instructional coaching proposal, best practice, reasons why. So that, I think, wouldn't fall under presentation of materials. That might be like, tonight we're having a presentation on this topic. So I just would ask that be made clearer so that it's not all-encompassing.
Commissioner Fisher.
Just a quick comment. Around there are some times that this happens and sometimes, and that's, I've changed the word to should. At one point it was must or will or much more definitive. And so I think the use of should opens it up for, hey, there's times that there's stuff comes out on a Monday that we want to deliberate on.
Commissioner Curry.
Thanks. So I guess that brings me to another aspect of this, executive summaries. So are you saying that the board should receive more details ahead of time and then executive summaries in the packet? Or when do we get the details, I guess is my question.
So the intent is, for example, let's use tonight when Marty presented on the options. We would be provided with that information, that full presentation in advance. he would then be able to speak for 5 minutes to say, this is what I sent you, it's a recap, and what's important to remember is this, and then okay, he's done speaking, and then we ask our questions, and we deliberate. So if you have suggestions about how to write that better, I'm absolutely open to that.
Can I add that also to consider, because there's different information, if we're coming to the board for the board to make a decision on something, it's different than if you're just receiving information just to say, hey, there's a climate strike on Friday or something like that, as opposed to if you have to make decisions. So think about that, how information should be shared, and so give people an opportunity to reflect on it and investigate. Because I think there's a number of pieces there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, everyone. We are going to move into executive session. I have the language for us to read.
I can read that, yes.
Commissioner Fisher, thank you.
So I make a motion to consider executive session under 1 VSA 313A1 AEF3 and 4 to discuss with legal counsel a failure to comply with regulatory requirements related to employment matters, the potential legal consequences thereof, and the consideration of possible appropriate personnel actions relating thereto, where premature public disclosure could place a district at financial advantage, and to discuss a personnel hiring matter.
Do I have a second? Commissioner Sowers? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we'll move into executive session.